I never thought I'd be the one standing outside a lawyer's office, watching my own family file past me like I was invisible. But that's exactly what happened on a cold Tuesday morning in October, when my grandmother's will was supposed to be read. They literally locked me out. My own cousins, my aunts, my uncles, people I'd grown up with, people I'd shared Christmas mornings and birthday parties with, they all walked past me without making eye contact. My cousin Sarah, who used to braid my hair when we were kids, actually turned her back when she saw me approaching the building. The pain of that moment still sits heavy in my chest, even now. You see, my grandmother Margaret had passed away 3 weeks earlier, and apparently I was the pariah of the family, the black sheep, the one who wasn't welcome at her final goodbye. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have possibly imagined, was that I was about to become the sole beneficiary of everything she owned. And I mean everything. The house, the land, the investments, the antique jewelry collection, even that old Buick she drove until she was 92. All of it, every single penny. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about money or inheritance or family drama. It's about secrets, about the lies we tell ourselves, and about how sometimes the people we think know us best are the ones who understand us least. And if you're someone who's ever felt like the outsider in your own family, or if you've ever wondered what it would be like to have the last laugh when everyone counted you out, then you're going to want to stick around for this. I'm Jessica, by the way, and I really hope you'll hit that subscribe button because sharing these deeply personal stories isn't easy, but I know there are others out there who need to hear them. The thing is, I wasn't always the family outcast. Growing up, I was actually pretty close to my grandmother. While my cousins were busy with their friends and their social lives, I was the one who would sit with Grandma Margaret on her back porch, listening to her stories about the old days. She'd tell me about how she met my grandfather during the war, how they built their first house with their own hands, how she started her business selling handmade quilts to keep food on the table when times were tough. I was fascinated by her resilience, her strength, her ability to turn nothing into something. My parents died when I was 16. A car accident on a rainy night in April. One minute I was a normal teenager worried about prom and college applications, and the next minute I was an orphan being passed around between relatives like an unwanted responsibility. Most of my family saw me as a burden, but not Grandma Margaret. She didn't just take me in, she welcomed me with open arms. She cleared out her sewing room to make space for me, bought me new furniture, and made sure I knew that her house was my home for as long as I needed it. Those 2 years living with her were some of the best of my life, even though I was grieving my parents. She taught me how to cook her famous apple pie, how to tend to her garden, how to fix things around the house instead of calling a repairman. She showed me her old photo albums and shared stories about family members I'd never heard of. We had this routine where every Sunday morning we'd sit at her kitchen table with our coffee and she'd read me passages from her journals. She kept journals her entire life, documenting everything from daily activities to her deepest thoughts about family, love, and loss. But when I graduated high school, everything changed. I'd been accepted to State University on a partial scholarship, and I was excited about starting this new chapter of my life. I thought Grandma Margaret would be proud of me, and she was. But the rest of the family? They had other ideas. My Aunt Carol, who was my mother's sister, suddenly decided that I should stay local and help take care of Grandma Margaret. She said it was my duty, my responsibility as the one who'd been living with her. The truth was, Grandma Margaret didn't need taking care of. She was sharp as a tack, independent, and perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. She was only 74 at the time, and she was in better health than most people half her age. But Aunt Carol had convinced herself, and tried to convince everyone else, that I was being selfish by wanting to go to college. She said I was abandoning the woman who'd raised me, that I was ungrateful, that I was just like my father who'd always put his own interests first. That last comment hit me like a physical blow. My father had been the kindest, most generous person I'd ever known. He'd worked 2 jobs to support our family, coached Little League baseball in his spare time, and never missed a school event or birthday party. To hear Aunt Carol disparage his memory like that, to use him as ammunition in her argument against my future, was devastating. But Grandma Margaret stood up for me. She told the family that I was going to college, that she would help me with expenses, and that anyone who had a problem with it could keep their opinions to themselves. She even offered to pay for my dorm room so I could have the full college experience instead of commuting from home. I'll never forget the look on her face when she said it. Fierce, protective, unwavering. It was the look of someone who'd fight the world for the people she loved. And that's when the family started turning against me. Not openly, not dramatically, but in those subtle ways that cut deeper than any direct confrontation. I stopped getting invited to family gatherings. When I did show up, conversations would halt when I entered the room. My cousins, who used to text me constantly, suddenly became too busy to respond to my messages. Family photos were taken when I was in the bathroom or getting a drink. I felt like I was being erased from their lives, one small slight at a time. The worst part was watching how they treated Grandma Margaret. They started visiting her more frequently, but it felt calculated, strategic. They'd bring her gifts, offer to help with errands, and make pointed comments about how nice it was to have family nearby who cared about her well-being. The implication was clear. I was the ungrateful grandchild who'd chosen education over family, and they were the devoted ones who truly loved her. College was a refuge for me. I threw myself into my studies, made new friends, and tried to build a life that didn't revolve around family drama. I majored in business administration with a minor in art history, inspired by Grandma Margaret's entrepreneurial spirit and her love of beautiful things. I called her twice a week, visited during breaks, and sent her letters and postcards from campus. She always seemed genuinely happy to hear from me, asking about my classes, my friends, my dreams for the future. But the family's campaign against me was relentless. They'd make comments to Grandma Margaret about how I was probably too busy with my new life to care about her anymore. They'd suggest that I was only calling because I wanted something, that I was just waiting for her to die so I could inherit her money. These accusations were so far from the truth that they were almost laughable, but they hurt deeply because I could see how they were affecting my relationship with the woman who'd saved me. During my junior year, Grandma Margaret had a mild heart attack. Nothing too serious, the doctor said, but it was a wake-up call. I drove home immediately, missing 3 days of classes to be with her in the hospital. But when I got there, Aunt Carol was already holding court in the waiting room, surrounded by other family members who were all discussing how this proved that Grandma Margaret needed more support, more supervision, more family involvement in her daily life. The way they talked about her, you'd think she was a child incapable of making her own decisions. They started making plans for her future without consulting her, discussing whether she should move into assisted living or whether someone should move in with her. They talked about her like she wasn't even there, like her opinion didn't matter. And when I tried to speak up, to point out that she was still perfectly capable of living independently, they dismissed me as naive and inexperienced. That's when I realized what was really happening. This wasn't about concern for Grandma Margaret's well-being. This was about control. They wanted to control her environment, her decisions, her relationships. And I was a threat to that control because I was the one person who treated her like the strong, independent woman she'd always been. After she was released from the hospital, I stayed for a week to help her get settled. We had long conversations about what had happened, about the family dynamics, about how she was feeling. She was frustrated by their overbearing behavior, annoyed by their constant suggestions that she couldn't take care of herself. She told me that she appreciated my confidence in her abilities, that I was the only one who still saw her as a person rather than a problem to be managed. But I also noticed changes in her during that visit. She seemed more tired, more withdrawn. She still had her sharp wit and her strong opinions, but there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. When I asked her about it, she just shook her head and said that getting older was harder than people realized, not because of physical limitations, but because of the way people started treating you differently. The family's interference became even more intense after her heart attack. They established a rotating schedule for checking on her, which sounds nice in theory, but felt more like surveillance. They had keys to her house and would let themselves in without calling first. They started making decisions about her medical care, her finances, her social activities. And gradually, they began limiting her contact with me. They'd schedule family visits during the times when I usually called, so she'd be too busy to talk. They'd plan family events during my school breaks, then tell me about them after the fact. They'd intercept my letters and cards, claiming they were just helping her organize her mail. When I'd call and ask to speak with her, they'd say she was napping or not feeling well or too busy to come to the phone. It was a systematic campaign to isolate me from the woman who'd been my anchor, my support system, my chosen family when my biological family had failed me. And it was working. My conversations with Grandma Margaret became less frequent, shorter, more strained. She seemed different, more hesitant, like she was being careful about what she said. I started to wonder if they'd convinced her that I really was the selfish, ungrateful person they claimed I was. During my senior year, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to write my grandmother a letter, not a casual update about school, but a real letter explaining how I felt about our relationship, how much she meant to me, and how much I missed the closeness we used to share. I poured my heart into that letter, telling her about my fears that the family was trying to turn her against me, about how isolated and hurt I felt, about how much I loved her and valued everything she'd taught me. I never got a response to that letter. When I called to ask if she'd received it, Aunt Carol answered the phone and told me that Grandma Margaret was having a difficult day and couldn't talk. When I asked specifically about the letter, there was a long pause before Carol said that she'd been helping organize Grandma's correspondence and hadn't seen any letter from me. She suggested that maybe it had gotten lost in the mail, but her tone suggested otherwise. That's when I knew for certain that they were intercepting my communications with her. They were controlling the narrative, making sure that the only information she received about me came through their filter. They were poisoning our relationship systematically, deliberately, cruelly. I graduated summa cum laude that spring with a job offer from a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago. It was everything I'd worked for, everything I'd dreamed of during those difficult years. But the achievement felt hollow because the person I most wanted to share it with had been taken away from me. I sent Grandma Margaret a graduation invitation, but she didn't come. Aunt Carol called to say that she wasn't feeling well enough to travel, but I later found out from a family friend that she'd been at my cousin David's graduation party the same weekend. So I moved to Chicago, started my career, and tried to build a life that didn't include the family who'd rejected me. I was successful at work, made good friends, even had a few serious relationships. But there was always this hole in my heart where Grandma Margaret used to be. I'd see elderly women in the grocery store or at the coffee shop, and I'd think about her. I'd hear certain songs on the radio or smell apple cinnamon candles, and I'd remember our Sunday morning talks at her kitchen table. I tried reaching out a few times over the years. I'd send birthday cards, Christmas presents, thinking that maybe time had softened whatever barriers the family had built between us. But nothing ever came back. No acknowledgement, no response, no sign that she even knew I was still thinking about her. Eventually, I stopped trying. It hurt too much to keep reaching out into that void, but I never stopped loving her. Even when I was angry, even when I felt betrayed and abandoned, I never stopped loving the woman who'd saved me when I had nowhere else to go. I kept the recipes she'd taught me, the life lessons she'd shared, the values she'd instilled in me. In many ways, I became the person she'd raised me to be, independent, resilient, determined to build something meaningful with my life. Then, 3 weeks ago, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was from a lawyer in my hometown, someone I'd never heard of before. His name was Robert Chen, and he was calling to inform me that my grandmother had passed away. She'd died peacefully in her sleep, he said, and he was the attorney handling her estate. The news hit me like a physical blow. I'd known this day would come eventually, but I wasn't prepared for the finality of it, the crushing realization that I'd never get the chance to reconcile with her, to explain my side of the story, to tell her how much she'd meant to me. I cried for hours that night, mourning not just her death, but the relationship we'd lost, the years we'd been apart, the conversations we'd never have. But then Mr. Chen said something that stopped me cold. He said that the will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday and that I needed to be there. When I told him that I doubted the family would want me there, that we'd been estranged for years, he said it didn't matter what they wanted. He said I was named in the will and that my presence was required by law. I was shocked. After all these years of silence, after all the ways they'd tried to cut me out of her life, she'd still remembered me in her will. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe a small token, a piece of jewelry, some books or photographs. But the fact that she'd thought of me at all felt like a gift in itself. So I drove back to my hometown for the first time in over a decade. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, more worn down, less significant. The house where I'd grown up with my parents was still there, but it had been painted a different color and had new landscaping. Grandma Margaret's house looked exactly the same, though, right down to the roses she'd planted along the front walkway. I got to the lawyer's office early, nervous about seeing the family again after so many years. I'd changed a lot since they'd last seen me. I was more confident, more successful, more sure of myself. But I still felt like that 18-year-old girl they'd made feel so unwelcome, so unwanted. And then they started arriving. First Aunt Carol, looking older and more stern than I remembered. Then Uncle Mike and his wife Linda. Then my cousins Sarah, David, and Jennifer, all with their spouses and children. They saw me sitting in the waiting area, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The whispering started immediately. I heard fragments of their conversations. "What is she doing here? I can't believe she has the nerve to show up. She didn't even come to the funeral." That last comment was like a knife to my heart. I hadn't come to the funeral because I hadn't known about it. No one had told me when it was happening, where it was being held, anything about the arrangements. I'd had to find out about her death from a lawyer rather than from family. When it was time for the will reading, something strange happened. The receptionist came out and asked everyone except me to follow her into the conference room. I started to get up, assuming I was included in everyone, but she put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Actually, could you wait here for just a few more minutes? Mr. Chen will be with you shortly." I watched as my entire family filed into that conference room without me. Some of them looked back with expressions that ranged from puzzled to smug. Sarah actually smiled at me. Not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile someone gives when they think they've won something. The door closed behind them, and I was left alone in the waiting area. I felt humiliated, confused, angry. After everything I'd been through, after all the pain of being excluded from family gatherings over the years, here I was being locked out of my own grandmother's will reading. It felt like the ultimate rejection, the final insult. I considered leaving, just walking out and driving back to Chicago and never looking back. But something kept me in that chair. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was just the faint hope that there was more to this story than what appeared on the surface. So I waited, listening to the muffled sounds of conversation coming from the conference room, watching the receptionist answer phones and sort through paperwork, trying to make sense of what was happening. About 20 minutes later, Mr. Chen emerged from the conference room. He was a small, neat man in his 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He approached me with a serious expression and said, "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting, Miss Peterson. Could you please come with me to my office?" As we walked down the hallway, I could hear raised voices coming from the conference room. Someone was arguing, someone else was crying, and there was a general sense of chaos and disbelief. Mr. Chen closed his office door behind us and offered me a chair across from his desk. "Miss Peterson," he said, "I want you to know that what just happened in there was not my idea. Your family insisted that you be excluded from the main reading, claiming that you weren't really part of the family anymore, and that your presence would be disruptive. I explained that this was highly irregular, but they were so adamant that I agreed to handle your portion of the inheritance separately." He paused, studying my face carefully. "I have to say, I'm curious about what happened between you and your family, because your grandmother spoke about you very differently than they do." My heart started racing. "She spoke about me?" "Oh, yes," he said, pulling out a thick file folder. "Your grandmother was one of my most meticulous clients. She updated her will multiple times over the years, and she was very specific about her wishes. She also left detailed instructions about how she wanted her estate to be handled, including several sealed letters that she wrote in the months before her death." He opened the folder and pulled out an envelope with my name written on it in Grandma Margaret's familiar handwriting. "She left this for you specifically, with instructions that it be given to you before the formal reading of your portion of the will." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. It was dated just 6 months ago, and as I read it, tears started streaming down my face. "My dearest Jessica," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you're probably wondering why I never responded to your letters and calls over the years. I want you to know that I received every single one of them. I kept them all in a special box, and I read them whenever I was feeling lonely or sad. Your words were like sunshine to me, reminding me of the bright, compassionate, determined young woman I raised. The letter went on to explain how the family had gradually taken control of her communications, how they'd convinced her that it was for her own good, how they'd made her feel like she was becoming a burden who needed to be protected from making poor decisions. She wrote about how much she missed our conversations, how proud she was of my accomplishments, how she'd followed my career from afar through mutual friends and acquaintances. I know they told you I was upset about you going to college, the letter continued, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I was so proud of you for pursuing your dreams, for refusing to let them limit your potential. You were the only one who saw me as a whole person rather than a problem to be managed, and I will always be grateful for that. She explained that as she got older and her health began to decline, the family's control over her life became more complete. They monitored her phone calls, screened her mail, made decisions about her social activities and medical care. She felt like she was living in a prison of their making, surrounded by people who claimed to love her, but who treated her like a child. I tried to resist, she wrote, but they made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, they would have me declared incompetent and take away what little independence I had left. So I went along with it. But I never stopped thinking about you, never stopped hoping that someday we would be reunited. The letter concluded with an apology. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stand up to them the way I should have. I'm sorry you felt abandoned and forgotten. I'm sorry I couldn't be the grandmother you deserved in your adult years. But I want you to know that you were always in my heart, always in my thoughts, always my beloved granddaughter. By the time I finished reading, I was sobbing so hard that Mr. Chen had to hand me a box of tissues. The grief I felt was overwhelming, not just for her death, but for all the years we'd lost, all the conversations we'd never had, all the love that had been stolen from us by people who claimed to have our best interests at heart. But there was also relief, incredible relief, to know that she hadn't forgotten me, hadn't turned against me, hadn't believed the lies they'd told about me. She'd loved me all along, just as I'd loved her. Mr. Chen gave me a few minutes to compose myself, then said gently, "Are you ready to hear about the will?" I nodded, not trusting my voice to speak. "Your grandmother left you everything," he said simply. "The house, the land, all of her financial assets, her personal belongings, her vehicle, her business interests, everything. You are the sole beneficiary of her entire estate." I stared at him in shock. "But what about the family? What about my cousins, my aunts and uncles?" "She left them nothing," he said. "Well, that's not entirely accurate. She left each of them $1, which is a legal way of acknowledging their existence while making it clear that the exclusion was intentional, not an oversight." He explained that the estate was worth considerably more than I might have expected. In addition to the house and land, which had appreciated significantly over the years, Grandma Margaret had been a shrewd investor. She'd put money into stocks, bonds, and real estate ventures. She'd also continued her quilting business well into her 80s, building up a substantial savings account. "The total value of the estate is approximately $2.4 million, he said. I felt dizzy. I'd had no idea she had that kind of money. She'd lived modestly, driving the same car for decades, shopping at thrift stores, clipping coupons. But apparently, she'd been quietly building wealth the entire time, planning for a future that would allow her to take care of the people she loved. There's more," Mr. Chen continued. "She also left detailed instructions about how she wanted certain items to be distributed. She has specific gifts for some of your old friends from high school, donations to several charities, and a trust fund for your future children's education." He pulled out another envelope, this one thicker than the first. "She also left you this. It's a collection of letters she wrote to you over the years, but never sent. She wanted you to know what she was thinking, what she was feeling, during the time you were apart." The weight of those unsent letters in my hands felt like the weight of all our lost years. I couldn't even begin to process what was happening. In the space of an hour, I'd gone from being the family outcast to being a millionaire, from thinking my grandmother had forgotten me, to learning that she'd never stopped loving me. "What happens now?" I asked. "Well, there will be a probate process, of course, but it should be fairly straightforward since the will is clear and comprehensive. Your grandmother was very thorough in her estate planning. He paused. I should warn you, though, that your family is not taking this well. They're talking about contesting the will, claiming that you manipulated her, or that she wasn't in her right mind when she wrote it. Through the office walls, I could still hear raised voices from the conference room. Someone was shouting about how this was impossible, how it wasn't fair, how they were the ones who'd taken care of her all these years. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd spent years pushing me out of her life, and now they were furious that their efforts had backfired so spectacularly. Do they have a case? I asked. Mr. Chen shook his head. I don't think so. Your grandmother was mentally sharp right up until the end. She underwent a psychological evaluation just 6 months ago at my suggestion, specifically to establish her competency in case the will was ever challenged. She passed with flying colors. She also met with me regularly to discuss her estate planning, and I have detailed notes from every conversation. It's clear that this was her decision, made freely and with full understanding of the consequences. He leaned forward in his chair. Between you and me, Miss Peterson, I think your grandmother knew this day would come. She knew they would try to fight the will, and she prepared for it. She documented everything, their controlling behavior, their attempts to isolate you, their mercenary interest in her money. She has a letter for the court, if it comes to that, explaining exactly why she made the choices she did. I felt a surge of admiration for her, even in death. She'd played a long game, appearing to go along with their demands while secretly planning her own form of justice. She'd let them think they were winning, while she quietly arranged for the ultimate reversal of fortune. There's one more thing, Mr. Chen said. Your grandmother left instructions that if the family contested the will, certain information about their behavior over the years should be made public. She kept detailed records of their financial requests, their attempts to control her, their treatment of you. She wanted to protect you from their potential legal challenges, but she also wanted to make sure the truth came out. As if on cue, there was a loud knock on the office door. Mr. Chen's secretary poked her head in and said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the family is demanding to speak with you immediately. They're quite upset. Mr. Chen looked at me. You don't have to speak with them if you don't want to. I can handle this. But I surprised myself by saying, no. I think I need to face them. They've controlled this narrative for too long. It's time for them to hear the truth. We walked back to the conference room together. The moment I entered, the arguing stopped and all eyes turned to me. The expressions on their faces ranged from shock to anger to disbelief. Aunt Carol looked like she'd seen a ghost. Uncle Mike was red-faced and sweating. My cousins just stared at me with their mouths open. This is ridiculous, Aunt Carol said, her voice shaking with rage. This can't be legal. She was obviously manipulated, confused, not thinking clearly. Actually, Mr. Chen said calmly, Mrs. Margaret Peterson was one of the most mentally sharp clients I've ever had. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she had very specific reasons for her decisions. But we're her family, Sarah protested. We took care of her. We visited her. We made sure she was safe and comfortable. Jessica abandoned her years ago. She didn't even come to the funeral. She didn't come to the funeral because none of you told her when it was happening, I said quietly. Just like you didn't tell her about family gatherings, didn't pass along my letters, didn't let her know when I called. That's not true, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, it is true, Mr. Chen said. Your grandmother documented everything. She knew about the intercepted letters, the blocked phone calls, the lies you told about Jessica's motivations and character. She was very specific about how you systematically isolated her from the granddaughter she loved. The room fell silent. I could see the realization dawning on their faces. They'd been caught, exposed, held accountable for their actions. She loved all of us, Jennifer said weakly. She wouldn't have left us with nothing. She left you exactly what she thought you deserved, I said. $1 each. Just enough to make it clear that she didn't forget about you. She just chose not to reward your behavior. Aunt Carol stood up abruptly. This isn't over. We'll fight this. We'll prove that she wasn't competent, that you manipulated her somehow. You can try, Mr. Chen said. But I should warn you that if you contest this will, your grandmother left instructions for certain information to be released publicly. Information about your financial requests over the years, Your attempts to control her, your treatment of Jessica. She wanted to protect her granddaughter from exactly this kind of challenge. The fight seemed to go out of them all at once. They knew they'd been outmaneuvered, outwitted by a woman they'd underestimated. They'd thought they were controlling her, but she'd been 10 steps ahead of them the entire time. One by one, they filed out of the conference room. Some of them looked angry, others just looked defeated. Sarah was the last to leave, and she paused in the doorway to look back at me. "You know, I never understood why she chose you," she said. "You left. You went away and built your own life and forgot about us." "I didn't forget about you," I said. "You pushed me away. You made me feel like I didn't belong, like I was a burden, like I was selfish for wanting to build something for myself. But I never forgot about any of you, and I never stopped loving Grandma Margaret." She shook her head and walked away, leaving me alone with Mr. Chen and the weight of my new reality. Over the next few weeks, I had to make a lot of difficult decisions. I took a leave of absence from my job in Chicago to handle the estate and decide what to do with my newfound inheritance. I moved into Grandma Margaret's house, sleeping in my old bedroom, walking through rooms filled with memories and the ghost of our lost relationship. I spent hours reading through the letters she'd written to me, but never sent. They chronicled her thoughts and feelings during our years apart, her pride in my accomplishments, her frustration with the family's control over her life, her hope that someday we would be reunited. Reading them was both heartbreaking and healing, like having all the conversations we'd never been able to have. I also found the box she'd mentioned, the one containing all the letters and cards I'd sent her over the years. They were carefully preserved, organized by date, with little notes in the margins where she'd written her responses. It was clear that she'd treasured every word, that my communications had meant as much to her as hers did to me. The family did initially try to contest the will, but their lawyer advised them that they had no case. The documentation was too thorough, the evidence too clear. They eventually dropped their legal challenge, but not before making several attempts to guilt me into sharing the inheritance with them. They sent messengers, old family friends, distant relatives, even the pastor from Grandma Margaret's church, to explain how much they'd sacrificed to take care of her, how much they deserved to be rewarded for their devotion. But I knew the truth now. Their devotion had been a form of control. Their sacrifice had been an investment in her estate. Their love had been conditional on their ability to manage her life. I decided to keep the house and use it as a retreat from my city life. I turned her sewing room into a home office and continued working remotely for my company in Chicago. I restored her garden, learned to drive her old Buick, and started hosting the Sunday morning coffee conversations she'd loved so much, but now with new friends from town who appreciated her memory. I also established a scholarship fund in her name for students who, like me, had overcome difficult circumstances to pursue their education. I funded it with a significant portion of the inheritance, knowing that she would have loved the idea of helping young people achieve their dreams despite family opposition or financial hardship. The most meaningful discovery, though, was her journals. She'd kept them faithfully for over 60 years, documenting not just daily events, but her thoughts about life, love, loss, and the complicated dynamics of family relationships. Reading them gave me insight into who she really was, beyond the grandmother I'd known and loved. In her final entries, she wrote about her hopes for my future, her regrets about our lost time, and her satisfaction with her estate planning decisions. She'd known that her death would create drama and conflict, but she'd also known that justice would ultimately prevail. She'd trusted me to use her gift wisely, to honor her memory, and to break the cycle of family dysfunction that had caused so much pain. And that's exactly what I intend to do. I won't let their attempts to control and manipulate define my future any more than I let them define my past. I'll use this inheritance to build something meaningful, something that honors the woman who saved me when I needed saving most. Looking back now, I realize that being locked out of that, will reading, was actually a gift. It spared me from having to watch their faces when they learned the truth, from having to endure their immediate anger and accusations. It gave me time to process the magnitude of what had happened, to understand that this wasn't really about money, but about love, recognition, and the triumph of truth over deception. My grandmother's final gift to me wasn't just financial security. It was vindication. Proof that she'd never stopped loving me, never stopped believing in me, never stopped seeing me as the granddaughter she'd raised to be strong and independent. She'd let them think they were winning, while she quietly arranged for the ultimate reversal of fortune. The family still doesn't speak to me, and honestly, I'm okay with that. I've learned that you can't force people to love you, to accept you, or to treat you fairly. But you can control your own response to their behavior. You can choose to rise above it, to build something better, to become the person you were meant to be despite their attempts to limit you. Sometimes I sit on Grandma Margaret's back porch, in the same chair where we used to have our conversations, and I can almost hear her voice carried on the wind. I imagine what she'd say about everything that's happened, about the family's reaction, about my new life. I think she'd be proud of how I've handled it all, how I've chosen grace over revenge, purpose over bitterness. The house holds so many memories now, not just from my childhood, but from these past few months of discovery. Every room tells a story, every object holds significance. I found old photographs tucked away in drawers, letters from friends she'd corresponded with for decades, recipes written in her careful handwriting. It's like she left me a treasure map of her life, and I'm still discovering new pieces of who she was. One of the most powerful moments came when I was cleaning out her bedroom closet. Hidden behind a row of dresses I'd never seen her wear, I found a small wooden box. Inside were mementos from my childhood, report cards she'd saved, artwork I'd made for her, photographs of us together at various family events. But what struck me most was a newspaper clipping from my college graduation. Somehow, despite all the family interference, she'd found out about my achievement and kept the announcement from the local paper. At the bottom of the box was a small velvet pouch containing her wedding ring, the one she'd worn every day for over 50 years, until arthritis made it too painful to keep on. There was a note attached. For Jessica, when she finds someone worthy of the love she has to give. The thought that she'd been planning even that detail, thinking about my future happiness, brought me to tears. I've been wearing that ring on a chain around my neck ever since. It's my reminder that real love doesn't try to control or manipulate. It supports and encourages, even from a distance. It trusts and believes, even when circumstances make that difficult. It endures, even when other people try to destroy it. The inheritance has given me opportunities I never imagined. I've been able to pay off my student loans, invest in my future, and contribute to causes that matter to me. But more importantly, it's given me the freedom to live life on my own terms, without worrying about financial security or family approval. I can make decisions based on what's right, not what's expedient. I've also been able to reconnect with some of the friends I'd lost touch with over the years. People who knew me before the family drama, who remembered the real story of what happened. It's been healing to hear their perspectives, to understand how my sudden disappearance from family events had looked to outsiders, to know that not everyone believed the narrative that had been constructed about me. One of my old high school friends, Maria, told me that she'd always wondered why I'd stopped coming to family gatherings. She'd asked Sarah about it once, and Sarah had said that I'd gotten too good for the family after going to college. But Maria remembered how excited I'd been about my future, how grateful I'd been for Grandma Margaret's support, how much I'd loved and respected her. She'd never believed that I would just abandon the woman who'd raised me. These conversations helped me understand that the family's version of events hadn't been universally accepted. There were people who'd seen through their manipulation, who'd questioned their motives, who'd remembered the real Jessica rather than the caricature they'd created. Knowing that has been incredibly validating. I've also made an effort to connect with some of Grandma Margaret's old friends, women who'd known her for decades, who could share stories about her life that I'd never heard. These conversations have been like receiving additional gifts from her, insights into her character, and experiences that help me understand who she was beyond my role as her granddaughter. Mrs. Eleanor Watson, who lived down the street from Grandma Margaret for over 30 years, told me about how my grandmother had quietly helped so many people in the community. She'd paid medical bills for neighbors who couldn't afford them, bought groceries for families going through hard times, and provided interest-free loans to young people trying to start businesses. She'd done all of this without fanfare, without expecting recognition or gratitude. "Your grandmother was the most generous person I ever knew," Mrs. Watson said. But she was also the most private about it. She didn't want people to feel ashamed or obligated. She just wanted to help, and she wanted to do it in a way that preserved people's dignity. This revelation helped me understand another dimension of her character, and it influenced my own decisions about how to use the inheritance. I've been following her example, quietly helping people in ways that don't call attention to my involvement. I've paid off medical debt for families in financial crisis, funded scholarships for deserving students, and supported local charities that align with causes she cared about. The scholarship fund I established has already helped 12 students pursue their education despite family opposition or financial hardship. Each recipient has to write an essay about overcoming obstacles, and reading their stories reminds me that my experience, while painful, isn't unique. There are young people everywhere who face similar challenges, who need support and encouragement to pursue their dreams despite family pressure or limited resources. One of the scholarship recipients, a young woman named Angela, wrote about how her family had tried to convince her that college was a waste of time and money, that she should stay home and help support the family business instead. Her essay could have been written by me 15 years ago. But unlike me, she had the scholarship to help her overcome those obstacles and pursue her education without feeling guilty about the financial burden. I've also been involved in establishing a support group for people who've experienced family estrangement. It's a small group that meets monthly at the local community center, and it's been eye-opening to learn how common these experiences are. People from all walks of life have stories about family members who've tried to control their choices, limit their opportunities, or punish them for pursuing independence. The group has become a source of healing and validation for all of us. We share strategies for dealing with guilt, for building chosen families, for defining our own worth independently of family approval. It's been particularly meaningful to me to be able to help others navigate these difficult waters, to share what I've learned about resilience and self-advocacy. Dr. Jennifer Kim, the therapist who facilitates our group, has helped me understand that what happened to me wasn't just family dysfunction. It was a form of emotional abuse. The systematic isolation, the control of information, the manipulation of relationships, these are recognized patterns of abusive behavior. Understanding this has helped me let go of some of the guilt I've carried, the sense that I should have tried harder to maintain the relationship with my grandmother. You can't maintain a relationship when other people are controlling all the communication, Dr. Kim explained. You were essentially being held hostage by their need to control the narrative. Your grandmother was too, in her own way. You were both victims of the same system. This perspective has been liberating. For years, I'd blamed myself for not being more persistent, for not finding a way to break through the barriers they'd erected. But I've come to understand that I was fighting an unfair battle, that they held all the cards and used them ruthlessly to achieve their goals. The most surprising development has been the contact I've received from other family members, distant relatives who weren't part of the inner circle that had orchestrated my exclusion. My second cousin Patricia, who lives in California, reached out after hearing about the will through the family grapevine. She told me that she'd always wondered what had happened to me, that she'd asked about me at family gatherings, but had been told that I'd moved away and didn't want to stay in touch. I never bought that story, Patricia said during our phone conversation. You were always such a family-oriented person, and you adored your grandmother. It didn't make sense that you would just disappear like that. Patricia shared her own experiences with the family dynamics, how certain members had always been controlling and manipulative, how they'd used guilt and obligation to manage other people's behavior. She distanced herself from them years ago, but she'd never known the full extent of what they'd done to me. I'm not surprised by what happened with the will, she said. Your grandmother was a smart woman, and she saw through their act. She knew who really loved her, and who was just positioning themselves for an inheritance. These conversations with extended family members have helped me realize that the core group who'd ostracized me didn't represent the entire family. There were others who'd questioned their behavior, who'd seen through their manipulation, who'd remembered me fondly despite the stories they'd been told. I've also learned more about the financial pressures that had motivated their behavior. Several family members had been struggling with debt, unemployment, or other financial difficulties. They'd viewed Grandma Margaret's estate as their safety net, their solution to their problems. When I became successful in my career, they'd seen me as a threat to their financial security. This knowledge doesn't excuse their behavior, but it helps me understand it. They weren't just being cruel for the sake of cruelty. They were protecting what they saw as their inheritance. They'd convinced themselves that they deserved it more than I did, that their proximity and caretaking efforts entitled them to her wealth. But they'd misunderstood the nature of inheritance. They'd thought it was about proximity, about being physically present, about performing the role of devoted family members. They hadn't understood that it was about relationship, about genuine love and connection, about understanding and respecting the person behind the inheritance. Grandma Margaret had seen through their performance. She'd recognized that their attention was conditional, that their devotion was tied to their expectations of financial reward. She'd contrasted that with my unconditional love, my genuine grief over our separation, my continued effort to maintain our connection despite their interference. The house has become a sanctuary for me, a place where I can feel connected to her memory and contemplate the future she'd envisioned for me. I've made some changes, updated the kitchen, renovated the bathroom, installed modern technology, but I've preserved the essence of what made it special. Her sewing room still contains her quilting supplies. Her garden still grows the flowers she loved. Her favorite chair still sits by the window where she used to read. I've also discovered the joy of entertaining in her home. The Sunday morning coffee conversations I've established have become a highlight of my week. Friends from town, former colleagues who visit from Chicago, members of my support group, they all gather around her kitchen table, sharing stories and creating new memories in a space that once held so much pain. These gatherings would have made her happy, I think. She loved bringing people together, creating spaces where meaningful conversations could happen. She believed in the power of connection, in the healing that comes from sharing our stories with others who understand. The legal battles never materialized beyond the initial threat. The family's lawyer had advised them that they had no case, and eventually, they accepted that reality. But the emotional aftermath has been ongoing. I still receive occasional messages from various family members, some angry, some pleading, some attempting to guilt me into sharing the inheritance. Aunt Carol sent a particularly manipulative letter last month, detailing her financial struggles and suggesting that Grandma Margaret would have wanted me to help family members in need. She painted a picture of herself as a devoted daughter who'd sacrificed everything to care for her mother, who deserved to be rewarded for her devotion. But I knew the truth. I'd read Grandma Margaret's journals, her letters, her detailed accounts of how the family had treated her. Carol's devotion had been a form of control. Her sacrifice had been an investment in the estate. Her care had been a way of isolating Grandma Margaret from the people she truly loved. I responded to Carol's letter with a simple note. I'm following Grandma Margaret's wishes exactly as she expressed them. If you have concerns about her decisions, I suggest you take them up with her attorney. I didn't engage with the guilt tactics or the emotional manipulation. I'd learned too much about healthy boundaries to fall back into those patterns. The scholarship fund has grown beyond my initial expectations. Local businesses have begun contributing, inspired by Grandma Margaret's legacy of quiet generosity. We've been able to expand the program to include not just college scholarships, but also vocational training, entrepreneurship grants, and emergency assistance for students facing unexpected challenges. One of the most rewarding aspects has been meeting the recipients and their families. Many of them come from situations similar to mine. Young people with dreams that don't align with family expectations, students who face pressure to abandon their goals for the sake of family obligations, individuals who've been told they're selfish for wanting to build independent lives. Marcus, a young man who received a scholarship last year, told me that his family had been furious when he'd chosen to study computer science instead of joining the family construction business. They'd accused him of thinking he was too good for manual labor, of abandoning his roots, of being ungrateful for the opportunities they'd provided. The scholarship had given him the financial freedom to pursue his education without feeling guilty about the burden he was placing on his family. Your grandmother's story gave me hope, he said. It showed me that sometimes the people who really love you are the ones who support your dreams, even when they don't understand them. And sometimes the people who claim to love you are actually trying to limit you for their own reasons. Stories like Marcus's remind me why this work is so important. Every young person we help is a victory against the kind of thinking that tried to limit me, that tried to convince me that family loyalty meant sacrificing my potential. We're breaking cycles, changing narratives, empowering people to pursue their dreams despite family pressure. The support group has also evolved into something more than I'd originally envisioned. We now host workshops on boundary setting, financial independence, and building chosen families. We've created a resource library with books, articles, and videos about family dynamics, emotional abuse, and recovery. We've even started a speaker series, bringing in experts to discuss topics like inheritance disputes, legal rights, and therapeutic approaches to family trauma. Dr. Kim has been instrumental in developing these programs. She's helped us understand that family estrangement isn't just a personal problem. It's a social issue that affects millions of people. Our group has become a model for similar programs in other communities, and we've been invited to speak at conferences about family dynamics and emotional abuse. The most profound change in my life has been the sense of peace I've found. For so many years, I carried the weight of rejection, the pain of exclusion, the guilt of not being able to maintain my relationship with Grandma Margaret. But now I understand that I was never the problem. I was just the inconvenient truth that exposed their manipulation, the reminder that love can't be controlled or manufactured. I think about her every day, but it's no longer with the ache of unfinished business. I know now that she loved me, that she was proud of me, that she never stopped believing in me. I know that our separation was not my fault, that I couldn't have prevented it, that I did everything I could to maintain our connection under impossible circumstances. The inheritance has given me more than financial security. It's given me validation, closure, and the ability to honor her memory in meaningful ways. Every scholarship we award, every person we help in the support group, every act of quiet generosity we perform in her name is a continuation of her legacy. I've also found unexpected joy in the simple pleasures of living in her house. Cooking her recipes, tending her garden, reading in her favorite chair. These activities connect me to her memory in ways that feel healing rather than painful. It's like she's still with me, still guiding me, still showing me how to live with purpose and integrity. The family's attempts to guilt me into sharing the inheritance have gradually subsided. They've realized that I'm not going to be manipulated, that I'm following her wishes exactly as she expressed them, that their tactics won't work on me anymore. Some of them have even begun to accept that perhaps their behavior contributed to their exclusion from the will. Sarah reached out a few months ago, not to ask for money but to apologize. She said she'd been thinking about everything that had happened, about how they'd treated me, about how they'd convinced themselves that their actions were justified. She admitted that they'd been wrong, that they'd let their financial anxieties override their family loyalties, that they'd hurt people they claimed to love. I keep thinking about how different things could have been, she said. If we'd just supported your dreams instead of trying to control them, if we'd included you instead of pushing you away, if we'd treated Grandma Margaret like an independent person instead of a problem to be managed. Her apology was meaningful, though it couldn't undo the years of pain and separation. But it represented a kind of growth, an acknowledgement that their behavior had consequences, that their actions had been harmful regardless of their intentions. I've been able to forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because holding on to anger was poisoning my own happiness. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing their behavior. It means choosing not to let their actions define my future. It means accepting that they're flawed people who made terrible choices, but that their choices don't have to limit my potential for joy and fulfillment. The most beautiful aspect of this entire experience has been the way it's opened my heart to new relationships and deeper connections. Living in Grandma Margaret's house has introduced me to her community in ways I never experienced as a child. I've met neighbors who've become dear friends, shopkeepers who remember her fondly, community leaders who've shared stories about her quiet contributions to local causes. These relationships have given me a sense of belonging that I never had with my biological family. They've shown me what healthy family dynamics look like, people who support each other without conditions, who celebrate each other's successes without jealousy, who offer help without expectations of return. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lives next door, has become like a surrogate grandmother to me. She's in her 80s, sharp as a tack, with a wicked sense of humor and a talent for seeing through people's pretenses. She knew Grandma Margaret for over 20 years, and she shared countless stories about her kindness, her wisdom, her strength in the face of family manipulation. "Your grandmother used to say that you were the light of her life," Mrs. Rodriguez told me. "She worried about you constantly, wondered if you were happy, if you were safe, if you knew how much she loved you. She never believed the stories they told about you not caring about her." These conversations have been healing balm for wounds I didn't even know still existed. To know that Grandma Margaret had defended me, had questioned their narrative, had held on to faith in my character despite their attempts to poison her against me, it's been profoundly comforting. I've also found love in an unexpected place. Michael is a teacher at the local high school, someone I met through the scholarship program. He's kind, intelligent, passionate about education, and completely unbothered by my family drama or my inheritance. He sees me for who I am, not for what I've been through or what I've inherited. Our relationship has been a revelation. He comes from a loving, supportive family who welcomed me immediately, who don't care about my past or my money, who judge me based on my character and how I treat their son. It's the kind of family dynamic I'd read about but never experienced. People who build each other up instead of tearing each other down, who celebrate success instead of resenting it, who love unconditionally instead of keeping score. When Michael proposed last month, he did it in Grandma Margaret's garden, surrounded by the roses she'd planted decades ago. He said he wanted her blessing on our union, that he could feel her presence in the house, and knew she would have approved of our relationship. I said yes through tears of joy, knowing that she would have loved him, that she would have been so happy to see me find the kind of love she'd had with my grandfather. We're planning a small wedding in the backyard, with the people who've become our chosen family. Mrs. Rodriguez will walk me down the aisle, representing the grandmother who should have been there. Members of our support group will be there, along with scholarship recipients who've become dear friends. It won't be a traditional family wedding, but it will be perfect in its own way, a celebration of love, growth, and the family we've created by choice rather than obligation. The house will remain our home, a place where we can honor Grandma Margaret's memory while building our own future. We've talked about having children someday, about raising them with the values she instilled in me: independence, integrity, compassion, and the courage to pursue their dreams despite obstacles. I imagine our children playing in the same garden where I used to help her plant vegetables, reading books in the same chair where she used to tell me stories, learning the same lessons about resilience and self-reliance that she taught me. They'll grow up knowing about their great-grandmother's legacy, about the importance of supporting others, about the difference between real love and conditional acceptance. Looking back on everything that's happened, I'm amazed by the journey that brought me here. What began as the most painful experience of my life, being excluded from my own family, separated from the woman who'd raised me, treated like an outsider in the place where I should have belonged, has become the foundation of a new and better life. The inheritance was never really about money, though the financial security has been transformative. It was about vindication, about validation, about the triumph of truth over manipulation. It was about a grandmother's love persisting despite attempts to destroy it, about justice prevailing despite years of injustice. But most importantly, it was about learning that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about the people who support your dreams, who celebrate your successes, who stand by you when times are tough. It's about the love that builds up rather than tears down, that encourages rather than controls, that endures rather than abandons. I found that family in the most unexpected places, in the friends who've become like siblings, in the neighbors who've become like grandparents, in the scholarship recipients who've become like children to me. I've found it in Michael and his family, who've embraced me completely. I found it in the support group members who understand my journey because they've walked similar paths. Grandma Margaret's final gift to me wasn't just the inheritance, it was the example of how to live with integrity, how to love without conditions, how to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult. She showed me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that refusal comes at a personal cost. Her legacy lives on in every scholarship we award, every person we help through the support group, every act of kindness we perform in her memory. It lives on in the lessons I've learned about resilience, about self-worth, about the difference between real love and emotional manipulation. And it lives on in the peace I've found, the joy I've discovered, the hope I have for the future. She wanted me to be happy, to be successful, to be surrounded by people who love me for who I am rather than what I can do for them. She wanted me to build a life of meaning and purpose, to use my gifts to help others, to never settle for less than I deserve. I've done all of that, and more. The scared, hurt 18-year-old who left for college with a broken heart has become a confident, successful woman who knows her worth and refuses to accept less than she deserves. The excluded granddaughter has become the sole heir to a legacy of love, generosity, and justice. If you're listening to this story, and you recognize yourself in any part of it, if you've been the excluded one, the scapegoat, the family member who was pushed away for pursuing your dreams, I want you to know that you're not alone. Your worth isn't determined by your family's acceptance or rejection. Your value isn't measured by their approval or disapproval. Sometimes the most loving families are the ones we choose for ourselves. Sometimes the greatest inheritances are the lessons we learn about resilience, self-reliance, and the courage to build better lives despite the obstacles others put in our way. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice prevails in the most unexpected ways. Love finds a way to triumph over manipulation. Truth overcomes lies, and the people who tried to control your story end up becoming footnotes in the much larger narrative of your success. That's what happened to me, and I believe it can happen to you too. The family that locked me out of the will reading thought they were writing the final chapter of my story. Instead, they were just clearing the way for the most beautiful chapter of all, the one where I learned that I was worthy of love, capable of building my own family, and deserving of every good thing that came my way. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever experienced family dynamics like this? Have you had to build your own chosen family? How did you find the courage to pursue your dreams despite family pressure? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others who might need to know that they're not alone in their struggles. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions, and your future isn't limited by their expectations. You have the power to write your own story, and it can be more beautiful than you ever imagined.